Yes, we are a nation in turmoil, and I have incredible hope for the future. My name is Erin Jones, as you already heard. Most people would say I'm pretty successful. I have been honored at the highest levels in education, from the Washington State PTA to the Milken Family Foundation, even to President Obama. What most people wouldn't know looking at me, though, is I was rejected the day I was born by a white woman who chose to leave me in the hospital after delivering me in 1971. I am a tall black woman with an afro, and I am the daughter of two Scandinavian Americans from northern Minnesota. I am an American citizen, and I was raised from kindergarten all the way through high school at the American School of The Hague in the Netherlands. I speak English, obviously, and I speak Dutch and French and Spanish. I'm an athlete. I know you're not surprised. Although not every tall black woman is an athlete. And I'm a musician and a writer and a lover of fashion. You know, I heard often as a child, you can't judge a book by its cover, and yet it seems like we as human beings are driven to jump to conclusions about people based on what we see in one glance. And one of the things I believe about life is no one's story can be understood in one glance. Not one of you out there is just one thing. We're the sum of our families and communities and schooling and work and relationships. Our lives are much more complicated than what can be seen on the outside. And yet I believe much of the turmoil of the United States right at this moment is that we don't take time to know those around us. And so you see me, black woman, and you've already told my story before you know what it actually is. And I believe there's incredible danger in that. My journey began, obviously, by being rejected by a white woman, and then I was taken in by a white family. I was raised at a school with the children of powerful world leaders. I came back to the United States to attend an elite women's college, where I was one of the only, and often not accepted. I married a black man from Tacoma, which brought me to the Northwest 20 years ago. And I've raised 3 children, now all adults. Of course, you could know none of these things if you saw me waiting in line for coffee. I served as an educator at an all-black school in North Philadelphia, and then in a predominantly white private school in South Bend, Indiana, and then in a very diverse middle school in Tacoma, and then a high school in Spokane, and then I served for 8 years as a state and school district administrator. About 2 years ago, I made the crazy decision to run for office. And I ran for state superintendent of public instruction, the first black woman to run for statewide office in Washington State. I traveled our state, meeting the people from as far north as Ferndale to as far south as Vancouver, from Seattle across the mountains to Yakima and Spokane and Walla Walla. And what I heard in the months leading up to and following the election absolutely broke my heart. I heard racial slurs, generalizations about large swaths of people, and I realized after talking to thousands of people, what I had feared was confirmed. Most people are only engaging and interacting with those they perceive to be like them. Over the years that I've lived in the Northwest, I often hear people talk about us here as being colorblind, post-racial, progressive, inclusive. Those words haven't matched my personal experience. But one thing the election did is it suddenly raised people's awareness about the xenophobia and sexism and racism that was actually occurring right here in our state. It woke people up who've never been involved in politics and those who'd been silent for a long time. Suddenly, people that had been passive were angry, upset, wanted to march. And so I say, yes, march, be angry, and commit to being part of lasting change. In just 1 month after the election, there were over 1,000 reports of bias-related incidents in the country, all too many of which were right here in Washington State. White people in my very interracial church suddenly coming to me saying, Erin, wow, did you see what happened in the news? And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I've been feeling it for quite a while now. But people were suddenly aware that maybe this united nation was not quite as united as they believed. In fact, one of my son's best friends, my youngest son's best friends, is now a youth leader at my church, and we were leaving youth group one night, and I overheard him talking about the most recent shooting of a 15-year-old black boy in Texas. And he was frustrated by the way people were talking about police. He said, I've talked to all my friends who are police, and I just don't understand why we're vilifying police. They're just doing their jobs. And I didn't say anything at the time. But I sent him a message on Facebook that evening. And what I wanted him to know, because he'd been raised around my 3 children, is that all 3 of my children have been profiled by police in our community. My 2 sons have been pulled over multiple times while riding their bicycles in our neighborhood and accused of being in the wrong place. My daughter, after she graduated from high school, was sitting out in our community park with her best friend who happens to be white. A police officer pulled up into the park, shined a spotlight in her face, asked her why she was breaking curfew, and when she said, "Sir, I'm graduated from high school, I'm headed off to college," he said, "I need to see your identification." And being my daughter, she said to him, "So why didn't you ask my white friend sitting next to me for her ID?" And he said, "Young lady, just follow directions." And so she took her ID out of her pocket, showed it to him, and when he realized that she was not a minor, he gave it back to her, got back into his car, and turned away. No apology. The young man from my church was shocked to learn that my son and I, exactly 1 year ago on my birthday, were followed for 15 miles by a state patrol officer in eastern Washington. We were headed to a campaign event. A car had passed us at over 70 miles per hour, but the police officer whipped around and followed us. I'll never forget that day, because I remember the terror in my son's eyes. I remember how hard he gripped that steering wheel, and his hands shook as if holding on for dear life. Or the picture that I took of the dashboard to prove that he was driving at 60 miles an hour, as if that would somehow save us later. Yes, racism still exists in this country. And I am glad we can finally talk about it. Unity is not going to happen by accident. Unity won't happen because we merely will it to be so. When I lost my election by 1%, I had a decision to make. Was I going to go back into the job market, take one of the jobs that I was offered, or blaze a trail for myself? And I made a very conscious choice. I realized suddenly my entire life story has led me to this moment to be a bridge. And so I decided in February to start my own consulting business. And I consult with churches and schools and government agencies and universities and help these places think about how can we encourage folks to tell their stories? How do we create space to build bridges? One of my favorite jobs has been the work I'm doing at Gonzaga University. I know there are some Zags in the room because I invited them. But the reason I love this work is because I was hired to work with staff and faculty to help them think about how do we better serve the community to create inclusivity. But what has happened is I have ended up working with a number of students to help them think about how do we use our voices to advocate for ourselves? How do I help them empower themselves to be able to share their stories? And what I'm so excited to tell you is they have been using their voices. They've been sharing their stories with staff and faculty and administration, with each other. They are seeking lasting change at Gonzaga, and I'm so incredibly proud of them. What I know when I look back over history is all the great movements in the United States have begun on college campuses just like this. And even though we are in turmoil right now, I believe that if we continue to tell the stories, if colleges begin to really wrestle with what does it mean to be inclusive, what does it mean for every person to belong and have value, there is hope for our future. Please share your stories. It is in the sharing of our stories that bridges will be built and rebuilt. It is in the sharing of our stories, the good, the bad, and the ugly, that we will find connections and common ground. Find ways to engage those who don't look like you or sound like you. Join clubs that maybe are dealing with topics you would not have ever considered before. Take a class that challenges you, maybe even makes you feel uncomfortable. Walk alongside someone who's different from you. Yes, have your own opinions. Hold true to what you believe. And be open to listening to new perspectives. Yes, be passionate. And be curious. Yes, decide to be part of the solution. And commit to engaging others on this journey. You are a college student. Your voice is necessary and critical to this nation. We need your youth and energy, your voice and your vision to help us move forward and become a truly united nation. I want to close this morning with a quote by Grace Lee Boggs, whose work has been influential at Gonzaga University. Here's what she says: "You cannot change any society unless you take responsibility for it, unless you see yourself as belonging to it and responsible for changing it." So, who are the members of your society? Are you willing to be responsible for all of them? Are there certain members of your society that you've avoided or that have been invisible to you? Do you know how to engage them all? And if you don't, do you know who you could reach out to help you do that work? I want to leave you with these questions this morning in the hopes that you, too, will choose to be a bridge. Thank you.